Well, firstly, welcome to Berlin. I'm Hugh Woozencroft. Alex Crook, talkSPORT's football correspondent, are with you. Of course, ahead of the Euros, but we're here to talk about something a little bit closer to home in the shape of Manchester United and Erik ten Hag, and reports that he will be getting a new contract. Remember, some had thought he was going to be on his way out of Old Trafford. Alex, what has been going on? In fact, over the last 2 weeks, really, when you think about Manchester United winning an FA Cup final against their big rivals, and suddenly so many people changing their opinions on what the future for the manager should be.
Yeah, it's been quite a bizarre situation, hasn't it? I remember standing on the pitch at Wembley taking a photo of Erik ten Hag cuddling the FA Cup as he came back down those famous steps at Wembley, much like Louis van Gaal did back in 2016 after they came from behind to beat Crystal Palace. And obviously Van Gaal famously lost his job shortly afterwards, almost as the team coach was pulling out of Wembley. You wondered, is this the last we'll see of Erik ten Hag? I spoke to him for talkSPORT after the game, and he was fairly bullish. And of course, in the press conference, he said, if this club don't want me, I'll go somewhere else and win trophies. And I think he felt at that stage that maybe his time was coming to an end. We had that story 24 hours before the cup final that win or lose at Wembley, it wouldn't make a difference to his future. If you remember, talkSPORT did push back on that and say, actually, there's going to be an end-of-season review. No final decision has yet been made. The longer the review went on, the more likely it seemed that a change of manager would occur at Old Trafford. We know that Sir Jim Ratcliffe met with Thomas Tuchel. We know that Pochettino was sounded out after leaving Chelsea, and we know that Roberto De Zerbi was also spoken to by the powers that be at Old Trafford. But ultimately, I think they decided, Ineos and Sir Dave Brailsford had a big say in whether there would be a change or not. He, I understand, was a big advocate for keeping Erik ten Hag, that actually there wasn't a stronger alternative on the market at this moment in time, and therefore not only was it business as usual, but Erik ten Hag will return to Old Trafford, emboldened by the fact, I think, the club want to extend his contract. I think they have to do that, because the issue you have with this review, because it was so public, because it was being discussed on talkSPORT and written about in the newspapers every single day, had he have walked back into United without the promise of a new contract, I think in the eyes of the players, and we know it's quite a problematic dressing room, I think his position would have been weakened.
We're going to come to the process next. We'll come to what the future might be for the squad and for Erik ten Hag and looking ahead to next season. But this process, for I think a lot of Manchester United fans, they've become very, very frustrated with. If not, they're maybe just a little bit confused, because it was over 3 weeks to make a decision about the future of the manager that's already been there for a couple of seasons. We know Manchester United, we got to be frank about it, had a terrible season in the Premier League, and the positivity was certainly rescued by beating Manchester City in an FA Cup final, which
a tactical masterclass, by the way.
Yeah, it was. And it was sensational, to be honest. Leaving impartiality to one side, I think we absolutely loved that day, you and I, as did all of the Manchester United fans. And it had, I think, left people scratching their heads. A lot of people were like, well, I didn't see anything in the Premier League that made me think he's going to take Manchester United on to great things. And then you see them beat the Premier League champions in the way that they did, like you said, a tactical masterclass. And you think suddenly maybe they've got something here, particularly with all the great young players that we have. Anyway, we'll come to the future. Like I said, the process. You spoke about all the managers there that they'd went through, some that they even actually took time to speak to about the managerial role, completely undermining ten Hag's position. And for me, the most frustrating thing in all of that was, it seemed like Ineos Sport and Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Sir Dave Brailsford, that come into the club and made all these new appointments, hadn't actually settled on what they want from the football team moving forward, because all of these managers had different styles and totally different characters.
Yeah, I think it shows the decision-making was clouded, because obviously Thomas Tuchel is a very different character to Mauricio Pochettino. Roberto De Zerbi plays different football to what we've seen from Thomas Tuchel. So it didn't seem like they had a clear identity. Then obviously there were the English possibilities of Graham Potter and Gareth Southgate. Still be interesting to see what happens with Southgate at the end of these Euros, and if United were to start the season poorly. But there didn't seem to be any joined-up thinking, because on the face of it, the 5 or 6 candidates they had in mind, if they decided to sack ten Hag, all would have brought very different qualities. So I absolutely make you right about that. And actually, I was listening to Mike Phelan, Sir Alex Ferguson's former assistant on talkSPORT, and he was saying, since they've come in, Ineos have done a lot of talking, not seen much action yet, and I agree with that. This is their most decisive step so far. We know they're trying to put in the proper sporting structure, and I think that's going to be significant for Ten Hag as well, because I don't think he wants as big a say on transfers as he's been allowed to have. I think he wants that transfer committee, Dan Ashworth and Jason Wilcox, to really lead that. Now that structure is in place, they're going to have to do something special in this transfer window. Not just in terms of signing players, because you mentioned there the Premier League season was terrible. They came bottom in a Champions League group that included Copenhagen. They've got to shift players on, and they've got to bring in players who are going to improve United and get them back to challenging alongside Manchester City and alongside Arsenal.
I've got to be frank once again. I think this is a decision that puts Manchester United back several seasons, possibly. When you run an organisation of this size in the shape of Manchester United, which is meant to lead its industry, it's meant to be one of the biggest clubs in European football. Ultimately, it is in many, many ways. At the moment, it isn't on the football pitch, as we know, and certainly in terms of winning the Champions League and the Premier League title, they are way off it. I think to have another summer window where you're recruiting players for a manager that you don't really have faith in. You might give him a new contract. We all know, given who you're speaking to, you don't really have faith in this manager. You've then undermined him quite clearly, so the players are thinking, what's the future going to be? Those great players at Manchester United that we do have thinking about renewing their contracts. Is Erik Ten Hag filling them full of faith? We know there's a real togetherness there, and I think mainly that's been built off the fact there has been so much outside criticism for Manchester United. But you've got to look at what your rivals are doing. Unfortunately, great players, very high potential players, I don't think are going to be signing for Manchester United. I just don't see why you would commit your future right now to Erik Ten Hag and this project without knowing very clearly what the club wants from it. What are they intending to deliver under Erik Ten Hag? And what does it look like? What kind of football are they going to play? You know, what is success for me? And I wouldn't hand over, if I was 21, 20, 19 years old, the next 4 or 5 years of my career, key to my development, to Manchester United, because we've seen it with the likes of Paul Pogba. We've seen players go there. I know it was a different leadership, but actually the reality is, it was a lack of clarity over who Manchester United should be, which meant that there's been a very slow development. And I think Marcus Rashford, many people argue, has been a victim of that as well. You know, just him as an athlete, what is the best version of him? Well, it's been different for different managers. And in the end, 5 or 6 years later, he hasn't probably made the progression that we would have thought. So for
That's
me,
not Rashford, though. That's not on Erik Ten Hag.
Listen, I'm not saying that none of it's on Rashford, but what I'm saying is that argument has been made. You know, there is obviously going to be a variety of different reasons and factors as to why a player doesn't develop how we maybe think they should have. But there is a part of me that thinks if I'm an agent and my player goes in to talk to Manchester United, I'm already thinking, based on what I've just seen with this process, I think we've got to be wary here. It doesn't really matter what money's on the table. Is this going to be the best decision for you as a football player? You know, and ultimately there's people out there that are going to say, Chelsea might be a better place for you right now, which is crazy to think. Ineos have not sent a message out to world football that Manchester United have changed. Ultimately, that's the point. I thought they would have done that straight away. We are a different Manchester United. All of those things that you could label at us or throw at us in the past have gone now. This is not Ed Woodward's Manchester United. This is Sir Dave Brailsford. This is Ineos Sport, and we are going to do things in the right way. And at the moment, we're just not seeing that.
Let's put our cards on the table. We had a conversation the day of the Championship playoff final at Wembley, the day after United had won the FA Cup. I was still beaming. You were trying to see the negative in the situation.
As always.
And you were telling me he's got to go.
Yeah.
Now, my reasons for him not having to go are because you look at the injury record, and it was no coincidence that on one of the rare occasions they managed to pair Martinez and Varane at the heart of a defence. They look much more solid in that department. They look much more tactically aware. I think you have to give Ten Hag credit for what he did in the final 2 or 3 Premier League games of the season, using Bruno Fernandes in that false number 9 role in preparation for the FA Cup final. That was his plan to beat Pep Guardiola's all-conquering Manchester City. Fernandes was absolutely key to that. Marcus Rashford had just been dropped from the England squad for the Euros. Ten Hag picked him up off the floor, and that was probably Rashford's standout performance of the season. And you talk about young players, and do they want to commit to this manager and to Manchester United? I think one of the key factors in Ten Hag being kept on is the way that he's put his faith and developed Kobbie Mainoo. Alejandro Garnacho's brother has already been on social media saying how much he loves the decision to keep the manager, so clearly there's respect there.
I bet.
Rasmus Højlund, I think got 16 goals in a team that didn't create too many opportunities. But again, I think he's a player that will improve under Ten Hag. So I think there are positives there. And you have to go back to the previous Premier League campaign. They got in the top 4. They reached 2 cup finals. And people say Manchester United are a bad side. Why is it then that when Ten Hag came up against better sides, they drew with Liverpool twice home and away in the Premier League, completely derailed their season by knocking them out of the FA Cup. They beat Manchester City and denied them the double-double. They played really well at Arsenal at the start of the season, just before the Jadon Sancho fallout. They can turn it on against the better teams. What they've got to find a solution for is the fact they struggle against inferior sides. I think if they can do that...
Whoa. Let's not skirt over that. You know, it's only a few words in what Crookie just had to say, but for me it tells a bigger picture. They struggle against the so-called lesser sides.
But that's the mentality issue with the players.
What do you mean? So Erik ten Hag's responsible for all of the good performances and none of the bad ones.
I'm not saying that.
Well then, and the players too. The players, they turn it on. They're great in this regard and that regard against the bigger clubs. That for me is a cultural issue that started before Erik ten Hag. So I don't blame him for that. But his job is to solve that. And ultimately, I don't think he has.
But he's
Manchester
trying
United
to solve that.
Have regressed.
But he's
on
trying
his
to
first
solve
year.
that culture issue.
You picked up his first year at the club. He got worse in the second year. Manchester United got worse in the second year.
But you mentioned cultural issues. That's absolutely important. And there's a clamour now, because he had a good game on television for Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League, that Jadon Sancho should be reintegrated. Jadon Sancho isn't a good enough player for Manchester United. He doesn't have that elite mentality. They need to sell him. That's job number one. They need to move on Casemiro, because unfortunately what we're seeing there is a player whose capabilities are on the wane. He had the Mason Greenwood situation to deal with, and that was terribly handled by the former regime. And you look at the way that Ten Hag has conducted himself. I think he gets more scrutiny than any other manager in the Premier League. You compare his season to Mauricio Pochettino. Until the last few weeks when it seemed to click for Chelsea, Pochettino was having a worse time of things at Stamford Bridge. And he didn't get the scrutiny.
No.
But he never reared up Erik ten Hag. He handled himself with tremendous dignity. And that's what you want from a Manchester United manager as well. You want that class.
He didn't have, a leg to stand on when it comes to raring it. He didn't have anything to say. When they were being criticised for being terrible, what was he meant to say, Crookie? We're great. In fact, that's what he did say at one point. We're the most dynamic team in the league.
That was trying to build up the players' confidence.
But let's be honest here. You know, Mauricio Pochettino had a better season than him. Chelsea, with respect to all the Chelsea fans out there, but they are a lesser club. In the Premier League, they had a better campaign than Manchester United, but they are, with respect, a smaller club than Manchester United. No, listen, we're talking about column inches here. We're talking about broadcasters' time. We all know it. There are more Manchester United fans. You are going to get more scrutiny. You are going to have more written and said about you. That's just a fact. I'm not saying it because I want to insult any club out there. So it is a totally different job at Manchester United. We speak about it so much. People say Graham Potter wasn't ready for Chelsea. Why? Because Chelsea was a much bigger football club than the one he was at before. We say it all the time about managers, and ultimately that is part of the game. But when it comes to Manchester United, one of the things that hurt me most about the previous regime was the acceptance of mediocrity. Yeah. Was players getting new contracts when they hadn't performed. And ultimately, Erik ten Hag getting a new deal at Manchester United is accepting mediocrity in the manager's dugout. That's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And I say accepting it, to be honest, I think they're doing it, Ineos, with one arm behind their back. They don't really want to do it, but they've spoken to other people. They didn't want to take the job. No one's their immediate right now. Do you know what? We'll stick with Erik ten Hag. By the way, reportedly because of fan pressure, which is another thing which points towards a hierarchy that aren't really sure on what they're doing. You know, with respect to the fans, it's great the fans are listened to on certain topics. When it comes to who the manager should be and what the direction for the football club is, I think at times, you know, as an organisation, you have to make the tough decision. You have to do the thing that will upset the fans in the short term, but will take the club to the next level in the long term. Had there been a much better manager available than Erik ten Hag, maybe we're having a different conversation right now. We're talking about them and what they might deliver. And maybe it was about the pool that's currently available. We should mention it while we're here. You know, many reports here that basically Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe are biding their time for a certain, as we're here at the Euros, Gareth Southgate, the England boss.
Surely you're not going to take that. As a Manchester United fan,
no, absolutely not.
You're not going to swap Erik ten Hag for Gareth Southgate. If you brought me Carlo Ancelotti,
we're having a different conversation.
Story.
Yeah.
You think it's set the club backwards. I'm going to take a different tact. You go back to Sir Alex Ferguson's time in charge. I know that was a bygone age, but there were big pressures on him going into an FA Cup tie against Nottingham Forest. They won 1-0. Mark Robbins scored the goal. United beat Forest en route to Wembley. Casemiro scored the header on this occasion. In both instances, they went on to win the FA Cup. The rest is history when it comes to Fergie. Maybe Erik ten Hag could be repeating that history.
In a word, before we end, will this decision prove, in your mind, to be the right one?
Yes.
And I'm going to say no. And we'll leave it there. Let us know what you think in the comments. Remember, we'll have much more on this story. And, of course, a big, big summer with all the transfers coming from our transfer guru, Alex Crook, all the way up to the start of the new campaign. In the meantime, get behind England and Scotland here at the Euros. We will have you covered right across all of the games live on the network. So we'll see you very, very soon. Take care.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.